Modern travelers complain about cramped airplane seats. Try spending 6 weeks on a camel's back, where legroom is non-existent, and your seat also spits at you if irritated. Camel caravans were the freight trains of the ancient world, slow, smelly, and utterly essential. Every night brought the same routine. Unload, rest, reload, repeat. No weekends, no breaks, just the endless horizon. So why did anyone sign up for this? The answer lies in the fragile threads of trade that stitched civilizations together. Threads will gently unravel tonight. The first night in the desert hits you like a physical force. There's no transition, no gradual adjustment, just the sudden absence of everything familiar. The air is so cold it makes your teeth ache, and the sand beneath you holds no warmth. From the day's sun, you keep waiting for some sound to break the stillness, but nothing comes. No insects, no wind, just the occasional shift of a camel's weight or the distant crunch of a guard's footsteps. It's not peaceful. It's unnerving. Modern life never prepares you for this kind of quiet. Even in the middle of the night, there's usually something: a refrigerator humming, a car passing, the distant sound of a TV. Here, the silence is absolute. Your ears strain for noise that never comes. Some travelers wrote about hearing their own heartbeat too clearly, the rush of blood in their ears becoming deafening in the absence of other sounds. Others reported phantom noises, whispers that weren't there, the distant sound of bells or voices. The desert plays tricks like that. Seasoned caravan workers had tricks for coping. They'd hum under their breath or tap their fingers against their legs to create some rhythm. But newcomers often couldn't handle it. There are accounts of men waking the whole camp because they swore they heard something moving in the dark. Usually, it was just the sand settling or a camel shifting. But sometimes the fear got to them, and they'd bolt, leaving their gear behind in their panic. The desert didn't forgive mistakes like that. The silence wasn't empty, though. If you listened long enough, you started to pick up on things. The sand itself made noise, a faint hiss, as grains slid against each other in the cold. Camels groaned in their sleep. Leather straps creaked as they cooled. And sometimes, if the air was just right, you could hear the distant howl of a desert fox, so faint you'd think you imagined it. These sounds didn't break the silence. They emphasized. It made it deeper. At dawn, the temperature would swing from freezing to blistering in minutes. The sand that had been cold enough to numb your fingers at night would soon burn your feet through your sandals. But for now, in these last quiet hours, the desert felt endless. The stars were brighter than you'd ever seen, and the horizon was so flat it looked like the edge of the world. Some travelers wrote that it felt like being the last person alive. Others said it was the closest they'd ever come to hearing the earth breathe. The guides knew better than to trust the quiet. They kept watch not just for bandits or animals, but for the desert itself. A sandstorm could come out of nowhere, and by the time you heard the wind, it was often too late. The stillness before. A storm was the most dangerous kind. The air would go completely dead, like the desert was holding its breath. Then the wind would hit like a wall, and the world would turn into chaos. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, there was. Just the cold and the dark, and the weight of all that silence pressing down on you. Newcomers always asked how far it was to the next stop. The veterans wouldn't answer. They knew the desert didn't care about distance. What mattered was whether you could stand another night like this, and another, and another. The ones who made it weren't the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could sit perfectly still in the darkness and not go mad from the quiet. By the third or fourth night, you'd start to notice the patterns. The way the sand dunes made shapes in the moonlight, the particular sound your camel made when it was about to lie down. The silence became familiar, almost comfortable. That's when you knew you were in trouble. The desert wasn't your friend. It was just waiting to see how long you'd last. The guides had a saying, "The desert speaks only once." Usually, that meant a storm or an ambush. But sometimes it was quieter than that. A missed waterhole, a lost trail marker. The difference between life and death out here wasn't dramatic. It was the slow accumulation of small mistakes, each one made worse by the fact that no one was around to hear you call for help. You'd think the hardest part would be the heat or the thirst or the sheer boredom of walking for weeks with nothing to look at. But it wasn't. It was the nights. The way the cold seeped into your bones and the silence got inside your head. The way every shadow looked like it was moving, even when you knew nothing was there. The desert didn't need to kill you. It just had to wait until you lost your nerve. Somewhere around the second week, you'd stop noticing the quiet. Or maybe it stopped noticing you. Either way, the nights became routine: unpack, eat, try to sleep, repeat. The veterans said that was when you were most at risk. Complacency killed faster than any bandit. But for now, on this first night, all you could do was lie there and listen to nothing at all. The stars were the only things that moved. They didn't twinkle like they did back home. They burned steady and cold, like holes punched in the sky. If you watched them long enough, you could see them shift, slow and inevitable. That was the only way to mark time out here, not by hours or days, but by the gradual turn of the heavens. The desert had its own clock, and it didn't care whether you were keeping up. But silence wasn't the only challenge. It makes this clear by groaning when you approach and snapping its teeth when you try to adjust the saddle. This is your transportation for the next 6 weeks, 1,000 pounds of muscle, bad attitude, and breath that smells like rotting vegetables. Camels were the SUVs of the ancient world, but unlike a car, yours might decide to sit down mid-journey and refuse to move, no matter how hard you pull the reins. The first thing you notice is the smell. Even from 10 feet away, the musky odor hits you like a physical force. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. After a week in the desert, you won't even notice it anymore, but everyone else will. The second thing you notice is the noise. Camels grunt, moan, and make a sound like a clogged drain when they're unhappy. And they're almost always unhappy. Their famous humps aren't filled with water, as some travelers thought. They're fat reserves, which means a well-fed camel can go weeks without eating. That's useful when crossing deserts with little vegetation. Less useful is their habit of storing urine in their mouths. When angry or threatened, they'll regurgitate this foul-smelling liquid and spray it at whatever annoyed them. Usually, you. Caravan handlers had tricks for managing them. They'd use a looped rope around the camel's nose, pulling it tight when the animal acted up. Some handlers sang softly to calm them down. Others carried a stick to tap their legs when they refused to kneel. None of these methods worked every time. A camel could decide, without warning, that today was the day it wouldn't take another step. When that happened, you had two choices: wait it out or lighten its load. The worst part wasn't the spitting or the stubbornness. It was the unpredictability. One day, your camel might walk calmly for hours without complaint. The next, it could bolt at the sight of its own shadow, sending your carefully packed cargo flying. Some camels hated specific people for no reason, refusing to let them near, or deliberately stepping on their feet. Others had grudges against particular items, water skins, certain types of baskets, or the color red. Training a camel took years. Handlers started when the animals were young, getting them used to saddles and loads bit by bit. Even then, some never fully adjusted. A fully grown camel could carry up to 600 pounds, but pushing them beyond their limits meant risking a violent reaction. Kicks from a camel could break bones, and their bites left deep, ragged wounds that often became infected. Caravans kept basic medical supplies for both humans and camels. A bite or sting might be treated with a paste made from crushed herbs and honey, though this did little more than dull the pain. Scorpion stings were a constant danger, especially at night when the creatures crawled into bedding or boots. Handlers knew to shake out everything before use. Camel wounds were trickier. If an injury didn't heal on its own, the animal was often left behind. No one risked slowing the caravan for a single camel, no matter how valuable. The relationship between handlers and their camels was strange. Some men spoke to their animals like old friends, whispering encouragement during long stretches. Others ruled with brute force, relying on fear to keep them in line. Neither method guaranteed obedience. A camel could work loyally for years, then suddenly turn on its handler for reasons no one understood. The veterans said you could never truly trust them, only predict their moods as best you could. What made them worthwhile was their endurance. Horses would collapse after days without water. Donkeys couldn't handle the heat. Camels walked for weeks on minimal food and water, their broad feet spreading their weight so they didn't sink into the sand. They could detect water sources miles away and would pull toward them when thirsty, a useful trick unless the water was poisoned or guarded by bandits. Loading them was an art. Packs had to be balanced perfectly, or the camel would refuse to move. Too much weight on one side, and it might roll over to relieve the pressure, crushing whatever or whoever was in the way. Handlers checked every strap and knot twice before setting off. A loose load could shift mid-journey, causing sores that made the animal even more ill-tempered. Despite the challenges, no one had a better option. Without camels, the deserts would have remained impassable. They carried spices from India, silks from China, incense from Arabia, goods that shaped empires. Their stubbornness, their foul tempers, Even their occasional acts of outright sabotage were just part of the price. You could hate them all you wanted, but you couldn't cross the desert without them. The handlers had a saying, "A good camel will save your life. A bad one will end it." You wouldn't know which yours was until it was too late. Some days it plodded along without complaint, its steady pace eating up the miles. Other days it would suddenly freeze, nostrils flaring at some scent you couldn't detect. Maybe it smelled water. Maybe it sensed a sandstorm coming. Or maybe it just wanted to ruin your afternoon. There was no way to tell. By the third week, you'd start to recognize the individual personalities. The one that always tried to bite when you tightened the saddle. The one that groaned like an old man when it stood up. The young one that spooked at everything but walked faster than the others. You'd even develop a grudging respect for the way they endured conditions that would kill most animals. But respect didn't mean trust. Every handler kept a wary eye on their camels, especially at rest stops. A well-placed kick could send a man flying, and a panicked camel might trample half the camp before anyone got control of it. The veterans moved slowly around them, avoiding sudden gestures. They knew the animals were as unpredictable as the desert itself, necessary, dangerous, and completely indifferent to human needs. The best you could hope for was an uneasy truce. You relied on them. They tolerated you. And if you were lucky, they wouldn't decide today was the day to teach you a lesson. And then there was the cargo. The cargo strapped to your camel's back isn't just valuable, it's the reason empires rise and fall. A single sack of pepper could buy a small house. A bolt of silk might equal a year's wages. These weren't just goods. They were fortunes. On the move, and every step through the desert put that fortune at risk. Pepper was the most common spice, but that didn't make it cheap. A pound of black peppercorns could cost as much as a month's food for a family. It came from India, traveling thousands of miles before reaching the Mediterranean. People didn't just use it for flavor. They prescribed it for everything from fevers to indigestion. Some even believed it could ward off the plague. The demand was so high that traders sometimes mixed in dirt or crushed berries to stretch their supply. Cinnamon was even more valuable. It didn't grow in neat little sticks like you'd find today. It came in rough, bark-like rolls, and the best quality came from Sri Lanka. The smell alone marked it as luxury sweet, woody, and strong enough to mask the stench of spoiled meat or unwashed bodies. Wealthy households burned it like incense, filling their homes with the scent to show off their status. Nutmeg was rarer still. It grew on a handful of islands in what's now Indonesia, and for centuries, no one in Europe knew exactly where it came from. Traders spun wild stories about harvesting it from giant birds' nests or collecting it from the bottom of mythical lakes. The truth was mundane, but the mystery kept prices high. A single nutmeg could sell for 7 times its weight in gold. Silk was different. It wasn't a spice or a medicine. It was pure status. The Chinese guarded the secret of silk production for over 1,000 years. The finest bolts were so light they seemed to float, and so smooth they felt like water running through your fingers. Roman nobles paid absurd prices for it. Even though wearing too much silk was technically illegal, the government thought it made men look weak. Incense was practical. In a world where bathing was rare and cities smelled like sewage and rotting food, a bit of frankincense or myrrh could make life bearable. Temples burned it by the pound, believing the smoke carried prayers to the gods. Wealthy families used it to perfume their clothes in homes. The best varieties came from southern Arabia, where the dry climate produced resin with the strongest scent. Gold and silver traveled too, usually in the form of coins or bars. These weren't just for spending. They were a backup if a caravan lost its other goods. The metal could still be traded. But carrying it was risky. Bandits knew exactly where to look for hidden compartments in saddlebags, and bribing officials to ignore smuggling costs added up fast. Textiles other than silk still had value. Fine wool from Anatolia, linen from Egypt, cotton from India each region had its specialties. A dyes alone could be worth more than the fabric. Tyrian purple, made from crushed sea snails, was so expensive that only emperors could afford full purple robes. A single ounce of the dye required tens of thousands of snails. Transporting this stuff wasn't simple. Spices were packed in clay jars or woven baskets, sealed with wax to keep out moisture. Silk was rolled tight and wrapped in oiled cloth, too, protected from dust. Incense resin was brittle, so it traveled in leather pouches padded with straw. Every extra layer of protection added weight, and every pound slowed the caravan down. Guards were mandatory. A typical caravan might have one armed man for every 3 or 4 merchants. They didn't just watch for bandits. They kept an eye on the other travelers, too. It wasn't uncommon for someone to try slicing open a bale of goods in the middle of the night, stealing just enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. The most valuable items traveled in the center of the caravan, surrounded by less tempting cargo. No one announced which camel carried the pepper or which saddlebag held the silver. Misinformation was part of the strategy. Let the bandits waste time searching the wrong packs while the real treasures moved past. Some goods never made it. Spices absorbed smells, and a few days near leaking wineskin could ruin them. Silk moths could chew through an entire shipment if given the chance. Resin might melt in the heat, sticking to its container and becoming worthless. The merchants factored this into their prices. A third of the cargo might be lost before reaching its destination, so the surviving 2/3 had to cover the cost. The risks were absurd. A sandstorm could bury a shipment of silk. A camel might collapse, spilling a jar of pepper into the dirt. A well-placed arrow could end the merchant's life and his profits in one shot. But the rewards kept people coming back. One successful trip could set up a family for generations. The math was simple. Buy pepper in India for a handful of silver. Sell it in Alexandria for 10 times that. Use the profits to buy glassware. Sell that in India for another markup. Do this a few times, and you could retire. If you lived, the caravans didn't just move goods, they moved ideas. The routes that carried silk also carried religions, languages, and technologies. A merchant might pick up a new way of making steel in one city, a recipe for glue in another, a story about a strange god in a third. By the time he got home, he was carrying more than just cargo, but none of that mattered when you were halfway. Across the desert, squinting at the horizon for signs of the next oasis. Out there, the cargo was just weight. The spices were just sacks. The silk was just fabric. The real value was in making it to the other side. The desert doesn't have road signs. No maps, no GPS, just endless sand in every direction that shifts with the wind. One wrong turn, and you're walking in circles until the water runs out. Caravan guides didn't need technology. They had the stars. Polaris, the North Star, was their anchor. While other stars moved across the sky, it stayed fixed in the north. Find it, and you knew which way to go. The trick was spotting it before the others appeared. Experienced guides could pick it out even in twilight, when the sky wasn't fully dark. They'd use it to check their heading every few hours, adjusting course as needed. If clouds hid the stars, the caravan usually stopped. Moving blindly was riskier than waiting. During the day, the sun became the guide. Skilled navigators watched its arc to judge direction, but it wasn't precise. The sun moves and shadows change. Morning light might point you east, but by noon, that same light could mislead you. Some guides used notched sticks to track the sun's angle, but most relied on instinct honed from years of travel. They knew how the light should look at certain times, how the heat felt on their skin when facing south versus north. Landmarks were rare but crucial. A oddly shaped rock, a particular cluster of bush, anything that didn't shift with the dunes. Good guides memorized these markers like a mental map. The problem was, sandstorms could erase them overnight. A rock that stood 10 feet tall one year might be buried the next. Some caravans stacked stones into small cairns to mark routes, but wind or bandits often knocked him down. The desert didn't like signs of human passage. Dunes themselves held clues. Seasoned travelers noticed patterns in how they formed, the way the wind carved certain slopes, the texture of the sand in different regions. A smooth, wave-like dune might signal a stable area, while jagged peaks could mean shifting, dangerous sands. Guides ran their hands along the ground, feeling for vibrations of distant storms or the faint crunch of underlying rock. Sometimes, the land whispered warnings. When all else failed, there were animals. Birds flying in a particular direction, often headed toward water. Certain insects only lived near oases. Guides watched for these signs as closely as they watched the stars. A sudden flock of doves at dusk might mean a hidden spring just over the next ridge. But misinterpret the clues, and you'd waste hours chasing mirages. The desert punished wishful thinking. The best navigators weren't just experts in directions. They knew weather, too. They could smell a sandstorm before it appeared, noticing a metallic tang in the air or a certain hush in the wind. They watched cloud formations that might signal rain rare in the desert, but catastrophic if it came. Dry riverbeds could flash flood in minutes, drowning anyone caught in them. Navigation wasn't just about where to go, but when. Most caravans had at least two guides who double-checked each other. One might swear they were headed due west, while the other insisted they'd veered southwest. They'd argue quietly, checking the stars again, until one conceded. Pride got people killed out here. The smartest guides admitted when they were unsure and called for a halt until they could confirm their position. Newcomers struggled with the scale. In cities, you might walk a mile and pass a dozen shops. In the desert, you could walk 10 miles and see nothing but identical sand. Without roads or markers, distance became abstract. Guides measured travel in days, not miles. A stretch might be 3 hard days or an easy week, depending on the terrain and weather. Time was the only ruler that made sense. Children born into caravan families learned navigation young. They'd practice by finding their way back to camp from short distances, then gradually farther out. Mistakes were allowed once. Get lost a second time, and you might not get a third lesson. Some cultures tested teenagers by stranding them, overnight with minimal supplies. Pass the test, and you became an adult. Fail, and you didn't come back. The stars told more than just direction. Their brightness hinted at weather changes. Certain constellations only appeared in specific seasons, letting guides estimate the time of year. Navigators tracked the moon's phases to predict tides of sandstorm. Dunes shifted more under a full moon's pull. The sky was a clock, a calendar, and a compass all in one. Speed mattered too. Moving too fast exhausted the camels. Too slow, and you'd run low on supplies. Good guides paced this caravan based on the terrain, pushing harder on flat ground, slowing for rocky passes. They knew when to rest and when to press on through the night. Some routes had dead zones, stretches with no water for days. Hit those at the wrong pace, and the caravan wouldn't make it. Stories helped. Oral histories passed down generations. Described landmarks long gone, riverbeds that had dried up, mountains worn down by time. A guide might say, "My grandfather told me of a well near here," and they'd find it centuries later, still barely flowing. Other tailies warned of places to avoid: cursed valleys, bandit ambush sites, dunes that swallowed men whole. Not all were true, but no one took chances. The truly lost left signs. A pile of stones, a scrap of cloth tied to a bush distress, signals for anyone who might pass later. Most who resorted to these markers were never found. The desert preserved some bodies as mummies, dry air halting decay. Others vanished completely, sand burying them within days. Guides used these grim discoveries as warnings to stay sharp. That pile of bones wasn't just a tragedy. It was a lesson. Seasonal routes changed with the weather. A path usable in spring might be impassable in summer heat. Guides kept mental ledgers of these shifts, adjusting schedules accordingly. Some caravans traveled only at night during hot months, sleeping through the worst of the day's heat. Others waited out sandstorm seasons entirely, knowing no amount of skill could conquer certain storms. The hardest part wasn't knowing where to go. It was admitting when you didn't. Stubborn guides led caravans to their deaths, refusing to turn back until it was too late. The smart ones checked their bearings constantly, comparing notes, watching for inconsistencies, One mistake compounded quickly. Get the angle wrong by a few degrees at the start, and days later you'd be miles off course. And when the stars weren't enough, left in the sun grew warm and foul, a breeding ground for insects and disease. Rationing was brutal but necessary. Adults might get a single cup per day, just enough to wet their mouths. Chewing pebbles helped trick the brain into thinking there was more saliva. Others sucked on strips of leather or cloth, dampened with their own sweat. The worst days came when the water ran low and the next source was still miles away. That's when arguments started. Who deserved more? Who could last longer without? False water sources were the cruelest trick the desert played. Mirages shimmered on the horizon, promising lakes that weren't there. Even experienced travelers fell for them sometimes, stumbling toward illusions until their legs gave out. More dangerous were the real pools poisoned by mineral deposits. Drink from one, and you'd be dead by morning with no warning except sudden, violent cramps. Bandits knew the value of water, too. Some waited near known wells, demanding payment for access. Others sabotaged sources, filling them with rocks or corpses to render them undrinkable. A few simply guarded the water and picked off stragglers as they arrived, weak and desperate. Smart caravans sent armed scouts ahead to secure sites before the main group arrived. Underground channels called qanats offered more reliable water in some regions. These tunnels tapped into mountain aquifers, directing water through miles of carefully sloped passages. Finding a qanat entrance could mean the difference between life and death. Some were marked by stone pillars or faded carvings. Others were known only to locals who might or might not share the knowledge. Rainfall was rare but treacherous. Dry riverbeds could flash flood without warning, turning from cracked earth to raging torrents in minutes. Some caravans used these sudden waters to refill supplies, racing to collect what they could before it drained away. Others got caught in the floods, swept under with their packs and animals. The thirst itself changed people. After 2 days without water, the mouth dried out, tongue swelling against the teeth. By day 3, headaches set in, sharp pains behind the eyes. Hallucinations came next, visions of rivers where there was only sand, voices calling from empty air. Some travelers wandered off, convinced they'd found salvation just over the next dune. Their bodies were usually found miles from the route, curled up as if sleeping. Water dictated the caravan's entire rhythm. Routes were planned around known sources, even if it meant adding days to the journey. The fastest path wasn't always. The safest crossing a dry stretch too quickly could exhaust the camels before the next watering hole. Guides balanced speed against caution, knowing one misjudgment could doom everyone. The sharing of water created alliances. Tribes along this routes sometimes traded water for goods or protection. A caravan might pay in spices or cloth for the right to refill its skins. These deals were fragile. A change in leadership or a rumor of betrayal could close off once friendly wells. Some groups maintained permanent way stations, charging steep prices for a night's stay and full water bags. Children learned early how to conserve water. They were taught to breathe through their noses to prevent dry mouth, to avoid speaking unnecessarily, to lick dew from rocks at dawn. In some cultures, kids as young as 6 were responsible for checking water skins for leaks each morning. Missed hole could mean tragedy days later. Seasonal rains altered everything. Routes impassable in summer became viable for a few weeks each year. Caravans timed their journeys to these brief windows, racing against the drying sun. Some wells only held water for a month after the rains arrived too late, and you'd find dust. The death marshes were the worst. When water ran out before the next stop, the caravan had to keep moving anyway. People staggered forward, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes sunk deep in their sockets. Camels bellowed and resisted, sensing their own doom. Those who fell behind were left. No one had the strength to carry them. The lucky ones found water just in time. Others didn't. And then there were the storms. The horizon looks clear. Then you notice it a thin, dark line in the distance, like someone drew it with a dirty brush. At first you think it's a trick of the light. Then the line grows taller, wider, until it fills half the sky. That's when you realize your mistake. The desert isn't still. It's coming for you. Sandstorms don't give warnings. 1 minute the air is calm. The next, wind hits like a punch, shredding visibility to nothing. The first wave feels like being slapped with a hot, gritty towel. Then the real storm arrives. Sand pours into your nose, your ears, the corners of your eyes. Breathing becomes a battle. Every inhale pulls in dust. Every exhale fights against the pressure of the wind. Close your mouth, and you suffocate. Open it, and you choke. Experienced travelers spot the signs before it's too late to sudden. Drop in temperature, the way distant objects blur like they're melting. Camels sense storms before humans do. They'll stop moving, plant their feet wide, and groan low in their throats. That's the signal to act fast. There's no outrunning what's coming. Shelter is a joke in the open desert. No trees, no caves. Just sand and more sand. The best you can do is huddle against the lee side of your camel, wrapping your head in whatever fabric you have. Your cloak becomes both mask and shield, pressed tight over your nose while the storm sandblasts your back. The camel sinks to its knees instinctively, forming a living windbreak. Its body blocks the worst, but not enough. The noise is unbearable. Wind screams like a living thing, drowning shouts. Sand hisses as it slides over leather, clicks against. Metal buckles. You stop trying to talk. Hand signals become impossible once visibility drops. The group splinters into isolated clusters, each person alone in a swirling brown hell. Time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. Sand works its way into everything: your water skins, your food, the seams of your clothes. It grits between your teeth no matter how tight you press your lips. Your eyes swell shut from the abuse, tears mixing with dirt to form muddy streaks. Breathing turns ragged, each lungful part air, part dust. Some storms last an hour. Others go all night. There's no way to know. You just endure until the wind decides it's finished with you. When it finally passes, The aftermath looks nothing like the landscape you remember. Dunes rearrange themselves completely. Familiar landmarks vanish. The storm doesn't just attack you, it redesigns the world around you. Counting survivors becomes the first task. People call out names, voices rough with dust. The lucky ones cough, can stand. The unlucky ones don't move. Sand can bury a man in minutes, filling his nose and mouth until he suffocates. Others wander off during the storm, blinded and disoriented, walking straight past their comrades without realizing it. Retrieval parties sometimes find their bodies miles away, curled like children in the sand. Gear disappears. Lightweight items, cloth sacks, wooden bowls, anything not tied down fly away, never to be seen again. Heavy items survive, but barely. Sand clogs waterskins, contaminating supplies. Food becomes inedible, gritty with particulates that grind between your teeth. Even if the storm didn't kill you, it might have doomed you slow. Camels fare better than humans, but not by much. Their slit nostrils and long eyelashes provide some protection, but prolonged exposure still takes a toll. Some develop respiratory infections from inhaled sand. Others go temporarily blind as grit cakes their eyes. A few panic during the storm, snapping their tethers and bolting. Finding them afterward is nearly impossible. Their tracks vanish in the reshaped dunes. Navigation tools fail utterly. Sand infiltrates sundials, ruining their accuracy. Star charts mean nothing when unfamiliar dunes hide familiar constellations. The storm doesn't just erase your path, it steals your ability to find a new one. Caravans have walked in circles for days after a bad storm, their guides hopelessly. Turned around, the psychological toll cuts deepest. Survivors describe a peculiar helplessness, the understanding that no amount of strength or skill can stop the storm. You don't conquer the desert in these moments. You just hope it lets. You live. Some travelers break afterward, refusing to continue. Others grow reckless, as if daring the desert to finish what it started. Preparation only helps so much. Veteran caravans travel during seasons when storms are rare. They listen to local guides, who know the weather patterns. They pack extra goggles and face wraps. None of it guarantees safety. A storm might rise from nowhere, ignoring all predictions. The desert follows no rules but its own. Recovery is slow. Shaking sand from clothes takes hours. Clearing it from equipment takes longer. Water reserves dwindle as people rinse their eyes and mouths. Camels need care for their irritated noses and swollen feet. The caravan becomes a hospital on the move, treating storm injuries while struggling forward. Lost cargo is often abandoned. Digging through dunes for one spilled crate risks wasting precious daylight. Some merchants mourn their goods like dead. Friends that bolt of silk was their livelihood, a jar of spices their retirement. The storm took more than sand. It took futures. Ancient trade logs mention storms in passing, as one notes bad weather. Delayed by wind hides horrors, the choking dark, the friends buried, the terror of being utterly powerless. These accounts survive because someone lived to write them. Many didn't. The desert reclaims evidence quickly. Within days, any bodies left behind vanish under fresh dunes. Within years, even buried goods disintegrate. Storms don't just kill, they erase. Somewhere under these sands lie entire caravans, preserved in sudden graves, their stories forever unheard. And then, there are the bandits. The desert wasn't empty. That was the first mistake travelers made. The dunes hid more than sand. They concealed eyes watching your every move. Bandits knew the routes better than the merchants did. They knew where caravans would slow down, where they'd camp, where they'd be weakest. And they planned accordingly. Guards were the obvious solution. A typical caravan hired one armed man for every 3 merchants, sometimes more for high-value cargo. These weren't just random muscle. They were professionals who knew how to use bows, spears, and curved blades designed for close-quarters fighting on shifting sand. Their job wasn't just to fight. It was to make fighting look like more trouble than it was worth. Bandits preferred easy targets. A line of guards standing watch made most think twice, but appearances could be deceiving. Smart bandits counted weapons before attacking. They noticed which guards looked alert and which were half asleep in their saddles. Some raiders tested defenses by sending small groups to harass the caravan's edges, probing for weak spots. If the guards responded sluggishly or broke formation, the real attack would come shortly after. Caravans used tricks to seem stronger than they were. They draped extra cloaks over baggage to make it look like more armed men were present. They tied brush to camels' tails at night, so when the animals flicked them, it sounded like movement in the dark. Some groups lit extra fires spaced far apart, creating the illusion of a larger camp. The goal wasn't to win a fight, it was to avoid one entirely. Route variations were critical. Taking the same path every time made you predictable. Successful. Caravans alternated between different oases, changed schedules randomly, and sometimes backtracked for no apparent reason. Guides knew alternate paths, narrow passes where bandits couldn't set ambushes, dry riverbeds that offered cover from watching eyes. The extra miles added time, but increased survival odds. Night travel was risky, but sometimes necessary. Under cover of darkness, a caravan could slip past known bandit territories. The problem was navigating without stars or landmarks. Some groups used hooded lanterns with slotted covers to cast thin beams just bright enough to follow. Others tied ropes between camels so no one got lost. The quiet helped too. No creaking wagon wheels or shouting to give away their position. But one stray noise could ruin everything. When attacks came, they were fast and brutal. Raiders preferred dawn or twilight, when visibility was poor and guards were distracted by meal rotations. Arrows would fly first, picking off lookouts. Then horsemen would charge from multiple directions, screaming to cause panic. Their goal wasn't to slaughter, it was to scatter. A divided caravan was easier to pick apart. Merchants had protocols. At the first sign of trouble, they'd form a circle with the camels at the center. Armed men faced outward, while others piled baggage into makeshift barriers. Those without weapons crouched low, holding saddle blankets overhead to deflect arrows. It wasn't elegant, but clustered together, they stood a chance. Separated, they died. Bandits weren't always outsiders. Sometimes they were former caravan workers who knew the routines too well. Others were desperate herders, pushed to raiding after droughts killed their flocks. A few were corrupt guards who tipped off gangs about valuable shipments. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. Caravan masters kept route details secret until the last moment and changed plans if someone acted suspiciously. Bribes were cheaper than bloodshed. Some groups carried small caches of lesser goods, low-grade spices, or coarse textiles, specifically for paying off raiders. The trick was making the offering believable. A bandit who thought you were holding out would get violent. Fast. Experienced negotiators knew how to haggle with armed men pleading poverty, while gradually discovering hidden valuables to appease them. Sleep was when caravans were most vulnerable. Guards worked in rotating shifts, but fatigue made them sloppy. Bandits timed attacks for the hour before dawn, when night watchers were exhausted and day watchers weren't fully alert. Some caravans dug shallow trenches around camps or scattered fallen branches to slow approaching footsteps. Others tied strings with metal cups between sleeping areas primitive, alarm systems that would clatter if disturbed. The aftermath of an attack lingered. Survivors had to decide whether to press on with diminished numbers or turn back. Lost cargo meant broken contracts at the destination. Dead guards needed replacement, assuming anyone would hire on after hearing about the ambush. Worst were the psychological scars. Every shadow afterward seemed to move. Every distant rider looked like a threat. Bandits had their own hierarchies. Lone wolves were rare, most answered to local warlords, who took a cut of the plunder in exchange. For protection, some groups operated like unofficial toll collectors, demanding passage fees from regular caravans rather than destroying their livelihoods entirely. A few even offered insurance pay them regularly, and they'd protect you from other raiders. Everyone knew it was extortion, but it beat the alternative. Weapons evolved to suit the environment. Long swords were useless on camelback shorter. Curved blades worked better in close quarters. Bows had to withstand temperature swings without warping. Arrows needed broad heads to punch through padded robes at close range. Some guards carried weighted nets to tangle attackers' legs or hooked poles to drag riders from mounts. Every advantage mattered when outnumbered. The best defense was reputation. Caravans known to fight back hard got left alone. Stories spread quickly how a certain merchant group had tracked down raiders and salted their water source, or how another had paid bounty hunters to bring back bandit heads on spears. Savvy leaders encouraged these tales, letting exaggeration do the work of actual battles. For all the planning, luck played a role too. Some caravans crossed the same dangerous stretches for years without incident. Others got hit repeatedly, as if marked by misfortune. Veterans developed superstitions. Never camp near certain rock formations. Always bury human waste far from sleeping areas. Avoid traveling on specific lunar phases. Whether these helped or not didn't matter. The illusion of control made the risks bearable. Sleeping safely meant accepting you were never truly safe. Guards could watch the perimeter, but darkness hid too much. Travelers slept lightly, weapons within reach, boots still on. The wise ones picked spots near the camels. The animals would stir at approaching footsteps long before humans noticed. Dawn brought relief, but also the knowledge you'd have to do it all again the next night. And then there were the animals. Your daily ration was a slab of hard-bred coarse barley or rye flour, mixed with grit that crunched between your teeth. In good times, it might contain actual grain. In bad times, sawdust, ground acorns, or even clay extended the dough. Breaking a tooth on this rock-hard loaf was a real danger. You'd soften it in water when possible, turning it into a soggy paste that at least went down easier. One traveler described it as wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. That was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Fresh food didn't exist after the first week. Vegetables were rare, even at the start, maybe a few turnips or onions if you were lucky. These got boiled into pottage, a thick stew that held whatever scraps were available. As days passed, the pottage grew thinner, the ingredients fewer, until it was little more than browned water with floating husks. Meat was a fantasy. Game belonged to local lords, and poaching meant severe penalties, fines, imprisonment, or worse. What protein they got came from dairy, but that carried its own risks. Cheese and butter spoiled quickly in the heat, growing bacteria-laden rinds. Milk turned sour within hours. You drank it anyway, because the alternative was nothing. Some travelers developed stomach cramps so severe they couldn't walk. Others vomited for days, but kept consuming the rancid product's calories were calories. Spices? Forget it. The caravan might be carrying sacks of pepper worth a fortune, but that cargo wasn't for eating. Your food tasted of dust and salt when you had it, which wasn't often. Salt was precious, used sparingly to preserve what little meat might appear, or to replenish electrolytes when water was scarce. You licked it from your palm like an animal, savoring each grain. Preservation methods were primitive. Meat, when available, hung uncovered for days in the heat, collecting flies before being dumped in wheat brine. The resulting jerky tasted like salted leather and often gave travelers diarrhea, a dangerous condition when water was limited. Fish, when carried, was dried until it could double as a weapon. No one cared about flavor. Edibility was the only standard. Drinks were as bad as the food. Water was rationed ruthlessly, just enough to wet your mouth. Tea required too much fuel to boil water, beer too heavy to transport. Some caravans carried wheat vinegar drinks to mask the taste of stale water, but these often caused more thirst than they quenched. Alcohol wasn't for pleasure. It was a last resort disinfectant for questionable water sources. Portion control was brutal. Guides weighed each share carefully, cutting exact slices from moldy cheese or counting out specific numbers of dried dates. Meals weren't scheduled by hunger, but by the caravan master's calculations. Eat too much today, and you'd have nothing tomorrow. Many tried hoarding food, only to find rodents or insects had gotten to it overnight. The desert took what it wanted. Hunger changed how people thought. Conversations revolved around meals they'd eaten years ago, detailed descriptions of holiday feasts, childhood treats, even mediocre tavern food. Some travelers became obsessed with listing ingredients, as if speaking them aloud might conjure the real thing. Others grew silent, retreating into private hunger fantasies. Fights broke out over crumbs. Physical effects set in after weeks of deprivation. Energy levels dropped. Walking became harder despite lighter loads as the caravan ate through supplies. Open sores took longer to heal. Gums bled, teeth loosened. Eyesight sometimes dimmed at the edges. Travelers learned to ignore their bodies' complaints. There was nothing to be done about them anyway. Scavenging yielded little. The desert wasn't kind to foragers. A few hardy plants could be eaten in a pinch, but most were bitter or toxic. Lizards and insects provided minimal protein at great effort, catching enough to matter, burned more calories than the food provided. Birds were too fast, snakes too dangerous. Some tried eating sand to fool their stomachs. It only made things worse. Children suffered most. Their growing bodies needed more than the scant rations provided. Parents gave portions of their own meals, but that just spread the weakness. Kids grew lethargic and listless, then dangerously thin. The caravan couldn't slow for them. You either kept up or were left behind. Many did. Special occasions warranted no special meals. Birthdays, holidays, the same hard bread, the same thin pottage. Sometimes the caravan master would declare an extra handful of dates per person to mark the day. These moments passed without celebration. No one had energy for festivities. Cooking was minimal. Building fires wasted time and attracted unwanted attention from bandits or rival caravans. Most food was eaten cold, chewed slowly to extract every possible nutrient. Hot meals happened only when no other option existed to render spoiled meat marginally safer, or to boil contaminated water. The smell of cooking tortured everyone. It promised sustenance the rations couldn't deliver. For the wealthy merchants, guards, the caravan master diets varied slightly. They might have occasional dried fruit, nuts, or properly preserved meats. These privileges were flaunted, eaten conspicuously while others watched. Resentment simmered but rarely boiled over challenging. The hierarchy meant losing your place in the caravan's fragile ecosystem. Endless hunger reshaped priorities. A trader might abandon valuable goods to lighten his load and preserve strength. A guard might look the other way during food thefts for a cut of the spoils. Personal belongings became bargaining chips. Spare shirt traded for an extra crust, a copper coin for a thimbleful of oil. Morality bent under starvation's weight. The final days before resupply were the worst. Rations dwindled to nothing. People licked their empty bowls, scraped at leather bags that once held flour, chewed on their own belts. Some drank their own urine, despite knowing it worsened dehydration. Others sucked on pebbles to stimulate saliva. Every step became an effort of will, every breath a reminder of the body's breaking point. Then, miraculously, a town would appear. The first meal after arrival was often deadly starved travelers, gorged themselves sick on rich foods their bodies couldn't handle. Survivors learned to eat slowly, reintroducing proper nutrition in cautious doses. But the memory of hunger lingered. Many carried extra rations forever after, unable to shake the fear of empty stomachs and endless dunes. And when food ran out completely. The caravan isn't just a line of camels and merchants. It's a walking Tower of Babel. Around your evening fire, you might hear half a dozen languages before the meal is finished. Persian traders arguing over prices in rapid-fire syllables. Egyptian guards swapping jokes in guttural consonants. A Sogdian merchant dictating letters home in curling vowels. None of it makes sense to you. Yet somehow, business gets done. You don't need fluency to understand danger. A shouted warning carries the same urgency in any tongue. When bandits appear, when a sandstorm looms, when a camel collapses, the tone says everything. Survival communication boils down to a handful of universal sounds, sharp shouts for alerts, drawn-out calls for help, guttural growls of frustration. Vocabulary doesn't matter when your life's on the line. Day-to-day trade relies on simpler tricks. Numbers come first. Everyone learns to count in multiple languages because getting prices wrong means losing money. Hand signals fill the gaps pointing at goods, miming qualities like soft or strong. A merchant might stroke imaginary luxurious fabric to indicate silk's smoothness, or pinch his nose and recoil to warn of spoiled goods. Some gestures become caravan-wide. A finger circling the ear means crazy price, while tapping the wrist means hurry up. Lingua francas emerge naturally. A simplified version of Persian or Aramaic becomes the default for basic transactions, just enough words to haggle, describe goods, and give directions. Grammar falls away. Sentences shrink to nouns and numbers. Silk good 50 silver. Gets the point across better than poetic phrasing ever could. These trade languages aren't pretty, but they work. Travelers pick them up fast within. Weeks you're stringing together broken phrases without thinking. Interpreters are worth their weight in gold. Some caravans employ professional translators who speak 3 or 4 languages fluently. More often, it's someone like you, a merchant, who picked up phrases along the way and gets recruited to bridge gaps. The pay is decent, but the stress isn't. Misinterpret a number during price negotiations, and you could spark a fight. Forget the local word for poisonous, and people die. Good interpreters develop tricks repeating numbers back in both languages, using objects to demonstrate quantities, drawing maps in the sand when directions get confusing. Written communication helps somewhat. Contracts use standardized symbols for common terms, a zigzag for water, a circle with lines for the sun, a stylized camel for transport fees. These symbols cross language barriers, allowing agreements to be understood, even if the surrounding script isn't. Merchants who can't read still recognize the marks that matter, their personal seal, the symbols for weights and measures, the crude drawings of the goods being traded. Body language carries hidden risks. A nod means yes in some cultures, no in others. Showing the soles of your feet is rude in certain regions. Touching someone's head is offensive elsewhere. Experienced travelers adopt neutral postures, hands visible, movements slow, expressions calm. Misreading these cues can turn a simple bargain into a blood feud. Some caravans employ local guides just to navigate social customs, whispering warnings before a merchant commits some unintended insult. Children adapt fastest. A 10-year-old playing with merchant kids at Oasis picks up languages in weeks, becoming the family translator by journey's end. Their pronunciation is often terrible. Their vocabulary is limited to trade terms and playground insults, but they bridge gaps adults can't. Some caravan masters deliberately hire multilingual teens for this reason. They're cheaper than professional interpreters and often more flexible. Silence speaks volumes. The way a merchant hesitates before naming his price. The subtle glance between partners when assessing goods. These unspoken clues reveal as much as words. Cheaters develop reputations fast. The Sudanese trader who always looks left when lying. The Indian merchant who strokes his beard before inflating prices. Caravans remember. Stories spread in broken languages and exaggerated gestures, warning newcomers who might otherwise get swindled. Music becomes universal communication. Work chants synchronize packing and unpacking, and rhythm tells everyone when to lift, when to pull, when to rest. Drums relay messages across distances, with distinct patterns for all clear, danger, or regroup. Even completely foreign songs get hummed along to after weeks on the trail. The melody transcends language. When there's nothing else to break the monotony. Code switching happens unconsciously. You start your sentence in Persian, finish it in Sogdian, throw in a Greek word for emphasis. The other merchants don't bat an eye, they're doing the same. These hybrid dialects emerge naturally on long journeys, blending the most useful words from multiple tongues. Some phrases stick. Caravan wide. The Arabic word for hurry might become standard because it sounds sharper. The Chinese term for expensive gets adopted because it conveys outrage better. Jokes rarely translate. Attempts at humor often fall flat. A pun that kills in one language means nothing in another. Laughter becomes its own language instead. The shared chuckle when a camel sits on someone's luggage, the exhausted giggle after surviving a sandstorm. These moments bond people more than any translated quip could. Records stay multilingual. A merchant's ledger might list goods in one script, prices in another, and notes in a third. Personal diaries become linguistic patchworks. Today's entry in Greek, tomorrow's in Aramaic, with margin notes in whatever language fits the thought. Some traders develop personalized, shorthanded Chinese character here, an Egyptian hieroglyph there, just to save space. Names cause constant confusion. Mohammed and Yusuf get recycled so often that people add descriptors. Mohammed, the bow-legged, Yusuf who sings off-key. Physical traits become identifiers more reliable than any introduction. You remember the Syrian with the scar across his nose long after forgetting whatever name he gave you. The chaos has rules. There's an unspoken hierarchy. Persian and Arabic dominate in the West, Sogdian and Chinese in the East. Important announcements get repeated in multiple tongues. Disputes default to whichever language both parties understand best, regardless of status. The goal is always clarity, not correctness. Perfect grammar earns no bonus points when you're trying to buy fodder at sunset. Trade languages evolve constantly. New words enter the lexicon with each stop a term for a previously unknown spice, a borrowed phrase for an unfamiliar tool. Old words mutate. The Bactrian word for cloth might narrow to mean only wool over time. Grammar simplifies further. Why bother with verb tenses when tomorrow go gets the job done? Some terms become unrecognizable from their origins after years of caravan use. Miscommunication carries real costs. Get the local word for half wrong when negotiating, and you've just sold your goods for a fraction of their worth. Mishear directions to a well, and your caravan wanders into bandit territory. The smarter traders double-check everything, repeating numbers, drawing maps, enlisting bystanders to confirm meanings. Others learn the hard way, losing money or lives to simple misunderstandings. By journey's end, you have developed an ear for language. Without realizing it, you've absorbed dozens of useful phrases, a rough sense of several grammars, and an instinct for when words fail. Next time, you'll pack a notebook to jot down terms as you learn them. Maybe you'll even bargain for a phrase book at the next major stop, if you can find one, and if the seller speaks enough of your language to explain how to use it, and when words failed. At dawn, the desert gives you no gentle warning. 1 minute you're shivering violently, teeth chattering against the cold that seeped into your bones overnight. The next, the sun crests the horizon, and suddenly you're sweating through your robes. The temperature swings aren't gradual, they hit like a hammer blow. By midday, the ground burns your feet through sandals. By midnight, you'll be wishing for those same sandals to keep the cold sand from sucking the heat from your body. The desert doesn't tolerate mistakes with clothing. That loose linen shirt that kept you cool at noon becomes useless when dusk comes. You learn quickly to carry extra layers, but space is limited. Most travelers wore clothes in modules like linens wrapped over wool underlayers that could be added or removed as needed. Some cultures perfected layered robes that could be cinched, tight or left open for ventilation. The trick was adjusting before you noticed the temperature change. Once you started sweating or shivering, it was already too late. Head coverings were mandatory. Wide-brimmed hats were impractical in wind, so travelers wrapped lengths of cloth around their heads instead. These kept the sun off your neck during the day and trapped warmth at night. The best were light colors. That reflected sunlight. Dark fabrics absorbed too much heat. Some cultures treated their wraps with oils to repel water during rare rains. Others wove special fibers that wickered sweat while providing insulation. Footwear had to handle extremes. Sandals kept feet cool but offered no nighttime insulation. Some travelers carried wool foot wraps to pull on when temperatures dropped. Others wore layered shoes leather outsoles with felt inners that could be removed. Anything with metal buckles was avoided. They grew searing hot in daylight and icy, cold at night. The best boots had thick soles to insulate against scorching sand, but weighed enough to make walking exhausting. Shelter was makeshift, but crucial. When rock formations or caves weren't available, travelers pitched simple lean-tos. These didn't need to be sturdy, just enough to block the midday sun or break the night wind. The smartest travelers positioned shelters to catch morning warmth, but provide afternoon shade. Some carried oiled cloths that could be rigged as both sunshades and windbreaks. Others relied on the camels themselves, huddling against their bodies for warmth when night temperatures plunged. Water played a surprising role in temperature control. Dampening your head wrap could provide evaporative cooling for an hour or two. At night, drinking warm liquids helped maintain core temperature without wasting fuel on large fires. Some travelers slept with warm stones wrapped in cloth at their feet, a trick borrowed from mountain cultures. Others buried water skins slightly underground during the day to keep them cool without ice. Behavioral adaptations mattered as much as gear. Travelers learned to rest during the hottest hours, moving at dawn and dusk instead. Eating patterns shifted small. Meals spread through the day prevented the heat-generating effort of digesting large portions. Experienced guides scheduled water breaks based on temperature, not just thirst, knowing hydration affected the body's ability to regulate heat. Children and elderly travelers suffered most. Their bodies couldn't adjust to temperature swings as easily. Caravans sometimes carried special shelters, for them small tents with layered roofs that trapped warm air at night yet vented heat during the day. Some made the children walk at night when temperatures were mildest, letting them sleep through the worst heat. Others assigned young people to carry extra water purely for temperature. Regulation sipping small amounts frequently helped maintain stable body heat. Animals required attention too. Camels could withstand temperature extremes better than humans, but needed care. Their heavy coats were shorn before summer journeys to prevent overheating. At rest stops, handlers checked footpads for burns from hot sand. Some caravans carried special blankets to drape over camels at night, preventing muscle stiffness from cold. Food storage became a temperature game. Items that could melt or spoil sat in the coolest packs during the day, then moved to warmer spots at night to prevent freezing. Cheese wrapped in wet cloth stayed edible longer. The evaporating water kept temperatures down. Some travelers buried food in shallow sand pits during the day, using the earth's insulation. Others hung supplies underneath camels during travel, where the animal's body heat prevented nighttime freezing. The temperature battle never stopped. Even sleep required strategy, lying directly on sand-pulled heat from your body. So travelers used layered mats or camel hair blankets as insulation. Some positioned themselves between camels to benefit from their warmth, though this risked being stepped on if the animals shifted. Others slept sitting up against packs to minimize contact with cold ground. Microclimates offered rare relief. Wadi valleys might be 10 degrees cooler than open desert. Some rock formations cast shadows that stayed cold all day. Smart guides knew where to find these spots, fitting them into the travel schedule, even if it meant taking a longer route. The difference between resting in shade versus full sun could determine whether someone succumbed to heat exhaustion. Seasonal changes altered everything. Spring and fall journeys were safest, with moderate temperatures. Summer travel was avoided. When possible, even nights stayed dangerously hot in some regions. Winter brought its own dangers, when nighttime lows could freeze water skins solid. Caravans planning winter routes carried special containers that minimized surface area to prevent freezing. Physical reactions to the extremes were unpredictable. Some travelers developed rashes from constant sweat and friction. Others suffered nosebleeds from dry air. Lips cracked. Skin peeled. The lucky ones adapted over weeks. The unlucky ones found their bodies breaking down heat stroke one day, hypothermia the next. Veterans watched newcomers for signs their systems couldn't cope. Mental effects compounded physical ones. Prolonged exposure to temperature extremes dulled thinking. Simple decisions became difficult. Some travelers made fatal errors, discarding warm layers too early at dusk, or drinking all their water during a hot afternoon. The desert didn't care about good intentions, only results. The caravan master didn't carry a fancy title or wear special robes. His authority came from the fact that everyone knew he was the only thing standing between them and death in the desert. One wrong decision from him, and the entire caravan could vanish into the sand. His word settled arguments, his route determined survival, and his judgment could mean the difference between finding water or finding bones. You'd think leading a caravan was about giving orders. It wasn't. It was about knowing when not to. A good master listened to the guides who spotted shifting dunes, heeded the merchants who remembered bandit attacks in certain passes, and watched the camels for signs of coming storms. But when the time came to decide, there was no committee. One person weighed all the voices and picked a direction. Then everyone followed, even if they disagreed. Discipline wasn't optional. Rules were simple. Steal water, and you were left behind. Start a fight over rations, and your share went to someone else. Slow the group by wandering off, and you'd be tied to a camel until you learned. The punishments sound harsh until you remember what was at stake. One person's mistake could kill dozens. Some masters carried whips as symbols of authority, but the best rarely used them. A reputation for fairness mattered more than fear. The job required a strange mix of skills. A master had to read stars like a scholar, haggle like a merchant, and fight like a soldier. He needed to know which wells were poisoned, which tribes would demand bribes, and which sandstorms were worth waiting out. Some knowledge came from scrolls or maps, but most was passed down orally. This pass floods in spring. That wadi dries up by midsummer. These rocks mean water is near. Forget one detail, and people died. Managing people was harder than managing camels. A caravan might include merchants from 5 cities, guards who spoke different languages, and pilgrims with no desert experience. Tempers flared over petty things, who got shade from a rock, whose camel ate someone else's ration. The master settled these squabbles quickly, often with humor. Let disputes fester, and they'd boil over when the next crisis hit. Resources were his to distribute, not equally, but fairly. Guards got extra water because they marched under the sun. Children received smaller portions, but more often. The sick were carried when they couldn't walk, but only if recovery seemed likely. Harsh as it sounds, the master couldn't waste resources on those who'd slow the group without hope of continuing. Survival wasn't personal. It was math. Navigation was his greatest responsibility. Stars told direction, but not terrain. A master memorized landmarks, the shape of a distant mountain, the angle of a dry riverbed. Some used notched sticks to measure the sun's arc. Others carried polished stones to reflect moonlight and signal distant scouts. Every method had flaws. Trust one too much, and you'd walk straight into a doomed field or bandit camp. Bandits were a constant test of leadership. Pay them off, and word spread that your caravan was easy prey. Fight them, and you risked losing guards and goods. The best masters negotiated while readying defenses, paying partial tolls to seem compliant while arming drivers to repel attacks. Some sent scouts ahead to bribe local chiefs for safe passage. Others hired extra guards just to look intimidating. There was no perfect solution, only calculated risks. Weather decisions carried life or death stakes. Push through a gathering. Storm, and you might beat it. Wait too long, and you'd lose days. Masters watched camels for clues if they huddled together. Bad weather was coming. If they refused to kneel, the ground might be unstable. Some kept journals of past journeys, noting wind patterns and temperature shifts. Others trusted instinct honed from decades in the desert. A night watch was his responsibility, too. Guards were posted, but the master checked them randomly. Sleep through your shift, and you'd walk the next day tied to a camel as punishment. Let bandits sneak in, and the entire caravan might wake up robbed or dead. The master's rounds were silent but thorough, a kicked sandal here, a whispered challenge there. Everyone knew he might be watching. Arrival at cities brought new challenges. Customs officials demanded bribes. Local rulers imposed taxes. Merchants argued over who'd pay for damaged goods. The master navigated these tensions while keeping his caravan united. Let one merchant undercut another, and next trip no one would trust him to lead. Fairness mattered as much at journey's end as in the desert. Failure had immediate consequences. A master who led caravans into ambushes soon found himself without followers. One who mismanaged supplies might be abandoned at the next oasis. There were no second chances when lives were on the line. Successful masters led dozens of trips, their reputations growing each time. The best were sought after like kings, their names whispered in trading posts months before their arrival. Oddly, the masters weren't usually the toughest or loudest. The best were often quiet, observant men who spoke only when necessary. They led by example, taking the first watch, giving their water to the sick, walking when others rode. Their authority came from competence, not threats. When they did raise their voices, everyone listened. The position wasn't hereditary. Sons didn't automatically inherit the role unless they'd earned it through years as guides or guards. Some masters came up through merchant ranks, others from military backgrounds. What united them was decades spent learning every desert secret, every trick of navigation, every human weakness that could doom a caravan. When a master died on the trail, succession happened fast. The senior guide usually took over, but only if the group agreed. Disputed leadership could split caravans apart, with factions taking different routes. The smartest masters groomed successors quietly, testing them with small decisions long before they were needed. Their legacy wasn't in monuments, but in routes still used centuries later. The paths we now call Silk Road trails were carved by countless caravan masters, each adding their knowledge to the collective memory. They left no grand tombs, just generations of merchants who lived because someone once made the right call at a barren crossroads. And when leadership failed, one minute you're adjusting your camel's pack straps. The next, you look up and realize the caravan has moved on without you. No shouts, no warning, just empty dunes where dozens of people and animals were standing moments ago. You call, but the wind carries your voice away. The tracks in the sand are already fading under the relentless wind. This is how people disappear. The desert doesn't care if you're lost. Without the caravan, your water supply lasts maybe 2 days if rationed. Food might stretch a bit longer, but it doesn't matter. Thirst kills faster than hunger. The human body can survive weeks without food, but in desert heat, you've got about 3 days without water before organs start failing. The math is simple and brutal. People got lost in predictable ways. A merchant stopping to relieve himself behind a dune. Guard wandering too far on patrol. A child chasing a mirage. The caravan wouldn't stop not immediately. They might send a scout back along the route, but only briefly. Every delay risked more lives. Better to lose one person than endanger dozens. Survivors wrote about watching the caravan shrink in the distance, about running until their lungs burned only, to see the tracks disappear under fresh sand. Mental effects hit faster than physical ones. Isolation does strange things to the mind. Lost travelers reported hearing voices, sometimes comforting, often mocking. Some saw elaborate visions of oasis cities where none existed. Others became convinced they were being followed by unseen figures. The line between reality and hallucination blurred quickly under the twin stresses of thirst and solitude. Survival tactics varied by experience. Seasoned travelers knew to stay put once they realized they were lost walking burned precious water reserves. They'd dig shallow pits under whatever shade they could find, conserving sweat by moving as little as possible. Newcomers usually panicked, exhausting themselves chasing imaginary salvation. Their bodies were often found miles from where they vanished, curled up facing away from the rising sun. Recovery efforts were rare, but not unheard of. Wealthy merchants might pay trackers to search for lost relatives. Some caravans left marker piles, small rock cairns pointing toward the last known water source. A few cultures used trained dogs to sniff out missing travelers, though the animals struggled with shifting sands. Most searches ended when the tracker's own water supply ran low. No one risked dying for a corpse. The process of dying was neither quick nor peaceful. First came the headache, a pounding pressure behind the eyes as the body tried to conserve fluids. Then dizziness, making it hard to stand. The mouth would dry out, lips cracking as the tongue swelled. Urination stopped as kidneys shut down. In the final hours, victims often tore off clothing, confused by rising body temperature even as their skin turned cold to the touch. Death usually came quietly, the heart simply stopping from strain. Animals finished what the desert started. Vultures circled long before death, their presence a grim countdown. Jackals and foxes sniffed out weakened travelers, sometimes attacking before the last breath. Insects found corpses within hours, laying eggs that would hatch into swarms. Within days, the sand reclaimed all evidence. A sun-bleached rib cage here, a shattered water skin there. The desert erased people efficiently. Some left marks behind. A few carved messages into rocks or arranged stones into arrows pointing toward their path. Others kept journals until their hands stopped working, documenting hallucinations alongside practical observations. These records were rarely found intact, son. Wind and scavengers destroyed most. The few that survived tell the same story. Confusion, then fear, then numb acceptance. Bandits sometimes preyed on the lost. They'd watch caravans from afar, noting stragglers to pick off later. A lone traveler meant easy loot, water skins, weapons, whatever goods they'd carried. Some bandits left their victims alive, but maimed, knowing the desert would finish the job. Others took slaves, though even they discarded anyone too weak to walk. In the desert, mercy was scarce as shade. Temperature extremes accelerated the process. Daylight burned exposed skin within hours. Night cold seeped into bones, slowing circulation. Without proper shelter, sleep became impossible. The body wouldn't allow complete unconsciousness when survival was at stake. Exhaustion compounded thirst until the mind couldn't form coherent thoughts. Many lost travelers died just steps from potential salvation, unable to recognize help when it appeared. Rescue was unlikely, but not impossible. Some survived by following dry riverbeds downstream until finding water. Others were found by nomadic tribes who knew the secret springs and hidden caves. A few stumbled into trade routes days after disappearing, their stories treated as cautionary tales. These survivors rarely traveled by caravan. Again, the desert had shown them its true face. Records mention occasional mass disappearances, whole segments of caravans vanishing during sandstorms or flash floods. These groups stood slightly better chances, pooling resources and knowledge. But without proper navigation, even large parties wandered in circles, drinking dry wells until nothing remained. Their final camps showed signs of desperation attempted. Weapons made from rocks, leather scraps boiled for nutrition, frantic digging in dry riverbeds. Children faced the cruelest odds. Small bodies dehydrated faster, their higher surface area losing moisture rapidly. Those who survived often did, so by sheer accident found clinging to dead camels or sheltered under overturned carts. Some were taken in by bandit groups, raised as their own. Others became stories parents told to keep kids close at night. No one deliberately abandoned children, but the desert made orphans casually. The wealthy died like everyone else. Gold. Coins couldn't buy water where none existed. Fancy robes provided no extra shade. Some merchants were found with jewels still clutched in skeletal hands, their treasures meaningless in the end. The desert stripped away pretensions of status, leaving only biology's harsh arithmetic. Water in, sweat out. When the equation didn't balance, Death came indiscriminately. Modern searchers still find remnants of these lost travelers. A belt buckle here, a rusted dagger there. Occasionally, a preserved body surfaces dried skin stretched tight over. Bone, mouth open in a final silent scream. These finds rarely make museums. There's no glory in displaying desperation. The desert keeps most of its secrets buried. And yet people kept traveling. The risks were known, the stories repeated around every campfire. But trade demanded movement, and movement meant gambling with the desert's patience. Somewhere between the caravans and the lost, the Silk Road wrote its real history, not in grand conquests, but in countless small disappearances across the sands. And for those who made it, the Silk Road wasn't a single dirt path you could follow on a map. It was more like a sprawling spiderweb of trails, sea lanes, and mountain passes, connecting everything from Chinese markets to Mediterranean ports. And silk, that was just the headline act. The real story was everything else moving along those root spices that could make you rich. Religions that could start wars, and ideas that would reshape civilizations. Let's start with the obvious. Silk really was valuable. A single bolt equaled a year's wages for some workers. But what made it special wasn't just the luxury. It was the weight. Light, packable, and insanely profitable per ounce. It was the perfect trade good for crossing deserts. Merchants could bundle fortunes onto a single camel. But silk wasn't even the most profitable item. That honor went to spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, which sold for multiples of their weight in gold at the far end of the routes. The road wasn't just about moving goods east and west. It was also about the stops along the way. Cities like Samarkand and Kashgar became melting pots where Persian merchants traded with Chinese officials, where Greek doctors debated Indian physicians, where Buddhist monks exchanged texts with Muslim scholars. These weren't just pit stops. They were hubs where cultures collided and remixed. You'd hear a dozen languages in one marketplace, see clothing styles from 3 continents, smell foods that combined local ingredients with distant spices. Religion traveled these routes faster than goods. Buddhism spread from India to China, along caravan trails, morphing as it went. Nestorian Christianity reached as far east as Mongolia. Islam moved through Central Asia, not just by conquest, but by merchant networks. These weren't orderly conversions, they were messy cultural fusions. A Buddhist temple in northern China might have Persian architectural touches. A Christian chapel in Syria could incorporate local pagan symbols. The road didn't just transport beliefs, it blended them. Technologies moved too, often with world-changing consequences. Papermaking traveled from China to the Islamic world, fueling an explosion of record-keeping and scholarship. The compass followed sea routes to Europe, making ocean navigation possible. Even mundane items spread stirrups revolutionized cavalry. Warfare, while new crops like peaches and almonds transformed local diets. Some inventions took centuries to diffuse. Others moved surprisingly fast within decades of gunpowder's appearance in China. Recipes for fireworks were turning up in Arabic texts. The economic impacts were staggering. Cities along the routes got rich on tolls and tariffs. The Sassanid Empire in Persia built entire fortresses just to tax passing caravans. Local industries sprung up to serve travelers, camel breeders, innkeepers, translators. Banking evolved to handle long-distance transactions, with letters of credit replacing heavy coinage. Some merchant families operated like multinational corporations, with cousins in Venice, Alexandria, and Beijing all moving goods through the network. But it wasn't all progress. The road also carried diseases. The plague likely spread along these routes, decimating populations from China to Europe. Invasive species hitched rides in cargo holds, rats, insects, plant seeds that disrupted local ecologies. And let's not romanticize the trade itself. Slaves were a major commodity at various points, with Central Asian tribes capturing and selling people across vast distances. Routes shifted constantly based on politics and climate. When the Mongols unified much of Asia under one rule in the 13th century, travel became safer for a time. Marco Polo wasn't unique, just one of many Europeans who trekked east during this period. But earlier and later, the road was fragmented. Wars could close passes for decades. Changes in sea navigation redirected traffic from land to ocean routes. Local rulers might suddenly hike taxes, forcing merchants to find alternatives. Cultural misunderstandings were constant. A Chinese envoy might mistake a Central Asian Khan's hospitality for submission to imperial authority. A Persian trader could offend a Chinese official by failing to perform the proper kowtow. Some conflicts arose from simple translation errors. The Mongol term yasak, laws, got misheard as yellow in some accounts, leading to bizarre medieval European legends about a Mongol legal code written on golden tablets. The maritime routes were just as important as the land ones. Spices from Southeast Asia often moved by ship to India or Arabia before joining overland caravans. Chinese porcelain reached Egypt via Indian Ocean traders. These sea lanes could carry bulk goods that land routes couldn't: timber, ceramics, even elephants for royal menageries. Piracy was a constant threat, though. A single storm could wipe out a year's profits. What made the whole system work wasn't governments or empires, it was middlemen. Sogdian merchants who spoke multiple languages. Jewish traders with connections from Spain to Afghanistan. Malay sailors who knew the monsoon patterns. These were the people who actually moved goods across cultural boundaries, navigating not just deserts and oceans, but also differences in customs, laws, and expectations. The road's decline came gradually. The Black Death disrupted everything. New sea routes around Africa made overland trade less essential. Political fragmentation in Central Asia made travel riskier. But the biggest shift was economic silver from the Americas flooded global markets. In the 16th century, making the old luxury trade less profitable. Why risk camels across mountains when ships could carry more for less? Yet the legacy remains. Modern highways in Central Asia sometimes follow those ancient caravan trails. The fusion cuisines of places like Xinjiang, where noodles meet spices meet bread, are direct descendants of road-era mixing. Even globalized supply chains today operate on principles those merchants would recognize. Find demand, fill it, and skim profits from the gap between here and there. The Silk Road wasn't about the silk. It was about what happened when people willingly or not got shoved together by economics and geography. The goods were just excuses for the encounters. The real product was the messy, violent, creative collisions that happen when worlds connect. And then there were the spices. The city gates rise from the horizon like a mirage that doesn't disappear as you approach. After months of sand and silence, the noise hits first donkeys braying, merchants shouting, children shrieking. The smells come next: roasting meat, sewage, perfume, the metallic tongue of blacksmiths' forges. Your camel, conditioned by weeks of emptiness, balks at the chaos. This isn't the end of your journey. It's just a different kind of test. Customs officials meet arrivals with practiced suspicion. They'll inspect your goods, assess taxes, and demand bribes disguised as fees. That spice pouch you thought was hidden? They know all the tricks. Their job is to extract value from travelers too exhausted to argue. You'll pay extra for damaged packaging, for alleged weight discrepancies, even for the dust on your sandals. Resistance means delays, and delays mean paying for lodging before selling your cargo. The savvy merchants budgeted for this. The others learned fast. Finding housing isn't simple. Inns charge exorbitant rates during caravan season, packing strangers together on shared mats. The cheaper places double as brothels or thieves' dens. Some travelers sleep in stables with their camels. Better the smell of dung than waking up robbed. Wealthy merchants might rent a room in the caravanserai, those walled compounds built for traders. But even those aren't safe. Your goods stay with you at all times, or they won't stay at all. The marketplace is where fortunes are made or broken. Local merchants will lowball you, knowing most caravanners can't afford to haul unsold goods home. Sell too fast, and you lose profit. Wait too long, and the next caravan floods the market, driving prices down. Some traders form temporary alliances to control supply. Others get scammed by locals posing as buyers, one distracting you while another slits your baggage. The first sale is always the hardest. The temptation to take any offer fades once coins actually change hands. Negotiating requires navigating unspoken rules. In some cities, haggling is expected. Start by offering a third of the asking price. In others, named prices are final, and bargaining insults the seller. A merchant might clap hands to seal a deal here, spit to confirm it there. Misreading. These cues costs money. So does failing to account for exchange rates. That chest of silver dirhams might be copper-washed fakes, or contain less precious metal than expected. Scales get rigged. Coins get shaved. Trust no one. Language barriers persist even in trading hubs. Your broken Persian won't protect you from contracts full of fine print. Legal disputes favor locals, their judges, their laws, their biases. Smart travelers hire interpreters, but even they might be in on the scams. Written agreements help, assuming the scribe doesn't alter terms mid-document. Some cultures value verbal promises more than parchment. Others treat written oaths as binding under divine law. Make the wrong choice, and your hard-won profits vanish in court fees, that the caravan's social bonds unravel quickly in town. Guards who risked their lives for you now negotiate higher wages for the return trip. Merchants who shared water compete ruthlessly for customers. Old grudges surface the time someone took extra dates, the night watch missed a thief. Some travelers form new allegiances with locals, marrying into trading families or taking apprenticeships. Others isolate themselves, guarding their earnings until it's time to leave. Shared suffering in the desert doesn't guarantee loyalty among strangers. Currency conversion becomes a mind-bending puzzle. That Chinese silk you carried sells well here, but now you're stuck with local coins no one accepts back east. Money. Changers take huge cuts converting between gold, silver, and copper standards. Some currencies trade by weight, others by count. A few places accept barter spices for ceramics, glass for wool, but figuring fair exchanges wastes precious time. The shrewdest traders buy goods that sell well at home, even if it means hauling heavy loads back over the desert. News from distant points on the route determines your next move. That war 3 cities west means certain passes are closed. A bad harvest up north doubled grain prices. Bandits control a critical oasis. Some merchants adjust plans on this intel. Others ignore it and regret it later. Messengers spread rumors as often as facts. Maybe that tale of pirates sinking ships is real, or maybe competitors planted it to keep you from underselling them. The truth won't surface until your next journey begins. Health risks shift in. Urban environments. The desert's deprivations gave way to new threats-tainted well water, spoiled meat in marketplace stalls, unfamiliar diseases. Some travelers fell ill after overeating rich foods their bodies forgot how to process. Others caught fevers from insect bites or developed infections from untreated blisters. Caravan medics knew desert injuries, but lacked cures for urban ailments. Death sometimes came faster in crowded cities than under open skies. Preparing for the return trip began immediately. Sell too much, and you'd have nothing to trade back home. Sell too little, and you couldn't afford new stock. Some merchants split their goods selling half here, reserving half for the next stop. Others bartered directly, exchanging spices for glassware they knew would sell elsewhere. The most desperate signed on as laborers for wealthier traders, exchanging sweat for a small stake in the next caravan. Not everyone went back. Some married into local families, using their knowledge of distant markets as their dowry. Others took jobs as translators or scribes, their caravan experience making them valuable. A few simply vanished into slums, into debtors' prisons, into unmarked graves. Those who did return often bore scars, missing fingers from city thieves, weakened, lungs from smoky taverns, haunted eyes from seeing too much. The desert's challenges were predictable. Human ones were not. The caravanserai became a temporary home for most. These walled compounds offered secure stables, basic lodging, and guarded storage for a price. Nights their mixed celebration, with tension. Drunken traders bragged about profits, while others plotted thefts. New arrivals brought fresh gossip from far-flung regions. Lingering too long meant paying extra fees. Leaving too early risked missing critical updates. Timing departure was as strategic as timing the market. For a few, the city became the endpoint. They'd worked years to afford a shop stall, a craft apprenticeship, a license to trade locally. Their caravan days were over until debts piled up, or new opportunities arose, or nostalgia overcame sense. Many who swore they'd never cross the desert again found themselves back on the sand within seasons. The rhythm of loading camels at dawn, of counting stars at night, of moving forward when every muscle screamed to stop, it got in the blood. The smartest travelers knew the real challenge wasn't crossing the desert. It was crossing back. Now, you had to do it all again, but with new goods, new threats, and less energy than before. That's why the caravan was never a single trip. It was a loop you rode until your luck or health ran out, and for some, the journey never ended. The caravan routes may be empty now, but their ghosts still haunt our modern world. Those winding paths across the desert didn't just move spices and silk. They laid down the blueprint for how we connect as a global civilization today. Think about that next time you order something online and track its journey across continents. The package might arrive via plane instead of camel, but the principle remains the same. Someone wants something, someone else has it, and distance is just an obstacle to overcome. Modern trade hubs owe their existence to those ancient stopping points. Cities like Dubai, Istanbul, and Samarkand built their first fortunes on caravan traffic. They started as simple rest stops where traders could water their camels, then grew into centers of commerce as middlemen set up shop. Today's free trade zones and shipping ports work on the same principal places designed to make exchange easier, where goods can change hands without getting tangled in red tape. The paperwork may be digital now, but the intent hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The old trade routes shaped more than just economics. They forced different cultures to figure out how to talk to each other. Caravans needed systems for measuring weights, recording debts, and setting standards that everyone could understand. Sound familiar? That's essentially what international trade organizations do today. They create common rules so business can happen across borders. The units of measurement might be more precise now, but the problem they're solving dates back to when a merchant had to convince a skeptical buyer that his bushel of dates was truly full. Some products never lost their appeal. The spices that drove the ancient caravan trade, pepper, cinnamon, nutmegs, still command premium prices today. You might have them in your kitchen right now, not realizing people once risked their lives to transport them. The containers are nicer, the supply chains more reliable, but that little jar of saffron in your pantry connects you directly to those desert crossings. The banking system has deeper roots in caravan culture than you'd guess. Letters of credit were invented so traders wouldn't have to carry heavy coins across dangerous terrain. Sound familiar? Today's wire transfers serve the same purpose-moving value without physically moving money. Even the concept of insurance started with caravan merchants pooling resources to cover losses from bandits or storms. The terminology has changed, but the fundamental idea remains. Those ancient routes also set patterns for how ideas spread. Religious beliefs, art styles, and technological innovations moved along with the trade goods. Today's internet does the same thing faster, but the mechanism isn't new. Valuable information has always followed trade routes. The Silk Roads transmitted everything from Buddhism to papermaking, just as modern trade spreads cultural influences today through movies, music, and fashion. The dangers haven't disappeared either. They've just changed forms. Bandits became customs inspectors demanding bribes. Sandstorms transformed into shipping delays. Water shortages turned into supply chain bottlenecks. The obstacles differ, but merchants still fret over protection, timing, and unpredictable events wiping out their profits. Some things never change. Modern infrastructure often follows those same desert paths. Highways in Central Asia frequently overlay ancient caravan trails. Railroad routes mirror the same passages camels once walked. Even flight paths sometimes follow the old geography, stopping at many of the same cities that grew up around ancient trading posts. The methods evolved, but the strategic thinking didn't. The caravans also shaped how we think about travel itself. Those traders were early masters of logistics, balancing speed against safety, cost against reliability. Today's shipping companies face the same calculations when deciding whether to route cargo around storm systems or take risks for faster delivery. The spreadsheets may be digital now, but the trade-offs would look familiar to any caravan master. Cultural mixing from the caravan era echoes today in unexpected places. The pasta you eat, the musical scales you hear, even certain words you use all traveled along these routes. When different groups met at trading posts, they didn't just exchange goods. They swapped recipes, songs, and turns of phrase that eventually worked their way into daily life across continents. The old networks even influenced political boundaries. Empires rose and fell based on who controlled key trade routes. Cities that positioned themselves as crossroads became powerful. That dynamic hasn't disappeared. Modern nations still jockey for control of shipping lanes, pipelines, and fiber optic cables. The stakes might involve oil instead of incense, but the strategic thinking remains strikingly similar. On an individual level, the merchant mentality persists too. Modern entrepreneurs share more with caravan traders than they might realize. Willingness to take calculated risks, ability to adapt to different cultures, skill at spotting opportunities where others see only distance and danger. The startup founder pitching investors isn't so different from the spice merchant convincing backers to fund his next journey. Some traditional caravan practices still exist in niche areas. In parts of the Sahara and Central Asia, camel caravans still transport goods to places modern vehicles can't reach. The loads might include solar panels and satellite phones now, but the basic challenges, navigation, water management, dealing with bandits, haven't changed much. These holdouts serve as living reminders of how all global trade began. The environmental impact also continues. Caravans altered landscapes by establishing permanent stops that became cities, just as modern trade shapes development patterns. The difference is scale. What took centuries then happens in years now. but the fundamental process of trade reshaping. Geography remains constant. Even our concept of globalization isn't new. Those caravan routes created the first interconnected world economy, complete with all its complexities and inequalities. Wealth flowed along the paths just as it does today unevenly, with middlemen capturing disproportionate gains. The players have changed, but the structure would look familiar to a Silk Road merchant. The most enduring legacy might be in our attitudes. The caravan trade proved that distances could be overcome, that differences could be negotiated, that isolation wasn't inevitable, that optimism still underlies modern trade, despite all the political and economic complications. There's a straight line connecting a medieval merchant loading his camels to a modern shipper filling cargo containers, both betting that what they have is worth someone else's effort to obtain that as the world becomes more digitized. The physical aspects fade, but the patterns remain. Data packets replace spice bundles, but they still follow paths of least resistance between interested parties. The camels are gone, but humanity's drive to connect, trade, and exchange persists. Those ancient traders set in motion systems and attitudes that continue evolving today in ways they could never have imagined. Those caravan traders were either brave or crazy, maybe both. They spent months crossing deserts so brutal, most of us wouldn't last a day, all so someone far away could sprinkle pepper on their dinner or wear fancy clothes next time you toss. Spices in your cooking, remember, people died to get those flavors to your kitchen. If you enjoyed this trip through the scorching sands, hit subscribe. It's free and helps more than you'd think. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. Now turn down those lights, close your eyes, and enjoy the fact that your biggest danger tonight is probably snoozing through your alarm. Good night.